Let's tell the truth today. A boundary you don't enforce is just a suggestion. And this is why so many people stay stuck in cycles that drain them emotionally because they say, I deserve better, but still give access to behavior that violates them. You can say you want consistency. You can say you want communication. You can say you even want emotional maturity. But if your actions keep rewarding inconsistency, confusion, avoidance, mixed signals, your boundaries aren't active, they're theoretical. And today, we're going to talk about why emotionally intelligent people still struggle to enforce even when they know better. Because this issue goes way deeper than communication. It's about our self worth, our fear, our attachment, and at the end of the day, our emotional discipline. We've talked about the stand framework over the last several weeks. Last week, we talked about the A for alignment. Today, we're going to navigate with boundaries, not walls, not manipulation, and not punishment. Boundaries are simply navigation. They tell people, this is how I operate. This is what I allow, what no longer has access to me. And today we're breaking that all down for you. Why boundaries fail, what weak enforcement actually looks like, and why people confuse boundaries with emotional control, and even how to build boundaries that actually protect. Okay, let's get into it. Most people don't really have boundaries. They have hopes. And let's go a little deeper with that. A lot of people believe that they have boundaries because they say things like, I'm not tolerating inconsistency anymore. I'm done accepting bare minimal behavior. I know my worth now. But when that happens, the person turns around, texts that individual again, ends up showing temporary effort, gives emotional breadcrumbs, and access is restored almost immediately. That's not a boundary. That's emotional negotiation. And I can give you a real life story. I fell down that same road. Everything that I'm sharing with you all are things that I've done myself in which this framework helped me recover and reset to start over. I found myself in a situation with someone that basically overran all the boundaries. And I also stood there and was trying to navigate the boundaries. And I set boundary after boundary after boundary. And yet found myself on the roller coaster. And that roller coaster costs. There's a cost there. I'm sure someone can relate to what I'm saying right now. There's a cost associated with riding that emotional roller coaster and not sticking to your boundaries and not even allowing that individual, preventing that individual to take you outside what you feel your standards are. I ended up personally going through some serious emotional baggage, dealing with that and finding myself lost and not understanding why I couldn't get off the roller coaster. But it wasn't that I didn't know what I wanted. It came back to who was I? So that's how I ended up in the stand, creating the stand framework. I had to start over. So I'm just giving you what I've been through and what helped me get to the result of relinquishing the pain, letting go of the baggage, and moving forward with my life. So when you start negotiating your emotional boundaries, a boundary is not what you say. A boundary changes when behavior doesn't. That's the difference. Because emotionally, many people are still afraid of losing that connection with someone they may have a relationship with, disappointing people. And the big one is even being alone. There are so many people today that are afraid to be alone. And sometimes you need to be alone to work out the first part of the framework. It may take you a little while to do that. But it doesn't mean you have to cut yourself off from society. It just means that you have to understand where you are when it comes to trying to navigate relationships, which is what we're talking about. And you establishing the point of you don't want to be misunderstood. So a lot of people that find themselves misunderstood and start going through these experiences often end up abandoning themselves, which is what I referenced before, in order to maintain that emotional comfort that you have for yourself. We're going to get past that because everybody has been there at some point. So let me ask you, why do smart people break your boundaries? I mean, this is the part that no one really talks about, right? You know, we are very smart people. Intelligence doesn't mean that you automatically create emotional discipline. I mean, you can run a company, you can lead teams, you can raise children, you can manage pressure and still struggle emotionally when attachment gets involved. And why is that? It's because boundaries are hardest to enforce when you crave connection the most. You know, it's one of those scenarios where you may have gone through bad relationship after bad relationship after bad relationship, and you find yourself not wanting to be alone, but still feeling afraid of standing with your standards. And you find that you may just relinquish some of those standards and allow some of the behavior that you normally would not accept into your realm. That's where I ended up. I had been through relationship after relationship after relationship to the point where I didn't know if I was even capable of choosing someone that would live up to the standards or that what I felt in alignment with. That's how bad it got. I mean, I know sure someone out there has been or is in the same scenario where you just get to the point you just don't trust yourself anymore. And that's a really hard place to be. And if you are unable to work that out yourself, sometimes there may be a need for some outside counseling just to work through some of the baggage that you may have had from previously. And we talked about some of that and how to get through some of that in the earlier parts of the framework. But you know, you say to yourself, "I'm done explaining," the basic stuff. You're talking about respect, right? But then you turn around and that person that you may be in a relationship with, they just disappear. No explanation, but no communication whatsoever. And then they work themselves back into the picture. And once again, you find yourself relinquishing your standards. So they come back. Things get emotionally intense. And that person gives you just enough attention to make you feel like, okay, you know, it's not going to be like it was the last time. And then you start rationalizing their behavior. Trust me, I've been there, right? And you already you already know what's unacceptable. You already know. So why are you going through this emotional roller coaster? And why are you basically entertaining potential, thinking that it's going to become reality? And that potential has trapped a lot of people in emotionally expensive situations. That one decision can not only bankrupt you emotionally, but it can also bankrupt you financially. If you've been in a relationship, a marriage, long-term relationship, and you've gotten to the point where you're just exhausted emotionally, you have been bankrupt to the point of you have no idea or no desire to pursue any type of relationship or even deal in any type of relationship that may appear to be going towards a serious direction. You just have no energy for it. But as I mentioned in the last episode, life is about living. And the worst thing that you can do is take yourself out of the game of life. Because life is all about learning, living and learning. Just because you may have come across a bad situation doesn't negate the fact that you deserve to be happy. So let's use an analogy of an apple. We're all growing. When we come into this world, we're growing both internally and physically. And if you look at a tree, when you plant a seed, that tree is growing down where the roots are, and it's also growing up, reaching toward the sun. But that tree needs all the elements of life in order for it to produce fruit. Now, here's one thing that we know for sure. We know how many seeds an apple produces, right? Because once you bite the apple and you get to the core, you can pick the seeds out. But here's the thing. When you take one of those seeds and you plant that seed, you have no idea how many apples that one seed will produce from that one tree. It could be 100, it could be 300, but all it took was that one seed. So I say that to share this with you. Just because you came across one bad apple, it doesn't destroy the entire crop, because there are opportunities out there in which you can meet other people who meet and live up to and are trying to live on the same level of standards that you are. So don't give up. Continue moving, but move with purpose and within your standards. So I'd like you to just take a moment, digest what we just talked about, and just write this down, right? Something to remember. If you don't take anything else from this episode, take this from the episode. A boundary without consequences is emotional self betrayal. I'll say that again. A boundary without consequences is emotional self betrayal. And that is your line, because boundaries only work when behavior changes the access. There are no threats, there are no speeches, there are no lectures. Behavior determines the level of access that of the individual. If the behavior is not consistent with your standard of boundaries, there's less availability, there's emotional distance. And in fact, you can revoke their access. You determine what access anyone has to you. And if they aren't living up to the standard that you want to see and that you envision, that level of respect, then you have the access, you have the ability to revoke that access. And in fact, their behavior determines your level of investment into that relationship, whether it be personal or professional. Sometimes you just have to remove yourself completely from that relationship. And yeah, that can feel uncomfortable because enforcing boundaries is uncomfortable, and it requires you to go through a certain level of grief in some cases. But if you don't grieve, you find yourself living in a world of potential and fantasy. And along with that comes an emotional attachment to someone who you hope to be what you want them to be. But that's just the hidden part that nobody prepares us for. The people who are not ever going to live up to your standards, but we compromise our standards to accommodate today. Are you aware that you train people how to treat you? I mean, literally, how you interact with people gives them the sign of how they should treat you. If you are constantly allowing people to go beyond your boundaries and violate your boundaries, disrespect you, then that's how people are going to. And the minute that you refuse to allow that type of behavior, then there's a different dynamic that takes place. Now, either that person can go along with it and treat you the way that you deserve to be treated, or they may choose to walk away themselves. Or it may be a scenario where you walk away, and that's completely acceptable as well. We all have to do that sometimes. At some point in time, we all have walked away from someone that we felt was not treating us in a manner that we felt we deserved to be treated, or that was in the same playing field as we are. There's nothing wrong with it. But people learn from your standards. They learn from what you have shown them you will allow, not what you put on social media, not what you're saying in your conversation, and not what you're claiming you deserve, but what you repeatedly tolerate becomes your emotional standard. So if someone just basically, as we spoke of, disrespects your time, and they disappear repeatedly, and they're avoiding accountability, and they're giving you inconsistent effort along with that, and you express yourself that aligns with your standards, and there are no changes, you're basically unintentionally training that person how to deal with you by granting them access to you. So if they're doing all these things and you're not holding them accountable for it, and they're not taking accountability for it, but you still allow them access to you, you are training them on how to treat you. And if you don't like the way you're being treated, then something has to change. Because eventually you're going to have resentment. not just towards them, but towards yourself because you know you deserve better. And it's not the way you deserve to be treated. So deep down, just as you feel like you deserve to be treated better, you also have to hold those people accountable to what your standards. So I want to start with 3 questions that can help you start your reset or even acknowledge how you want to be treated and measure where you are in navigating your boundaries. And the first one is, what behavior keeps draining you, not irritating you, specifically draining you? Because there is a big difference between irritation and just draining you, right? Someone who constantly may say something that irritates you because they continue to repeat it, they may irritate you. But draining you can be a scenario in which you're constantly trying or having to revisit the same conversation over and over and over again as a grown adult. Something that you've already mentioned bothers you, and that person continues to perform that action that bothers you, or they continue to give you an excuse which you've already had a conversation about and how you felt about that conversation. But that individual continues to bring that same conversation up, and it becomes right? To the point where you just don't want to deal with it anymore. It may be a scenario to which this person is supposed to pick you up from work at a certain time because you need some help. Your car may be down, and that person for 2 consecutive weeks is late every day. That's training, right? So just giving you some real world examples of what to think about. Now, the second part of that question is, what consequences have you actually enforced? Not threaten, not say, well, if you do this again, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. No. What consequences have you actually enforced with that individual? And be honest with yourself. Write these things down. And the third question, what are you afraid will happen if you fully enforce your boundary? What, and you can add, I just put it in the me context, right? What am I afraid will happen if I fully enforce this boundary? This takes real work because most broken boundaries are connected to fear of abandonment, loneliness, guilt. You know, it can even be emotional attachment or the fear of starting over. I can't tell you how many conversations that I've had where individuals are just afraid of starting over. The comment, I don't want to start over again. However, if we're growing, we're constantly starting over. We're just not starting from the same point that we were because we learned something along the way. So being afraid of starting over is a false reality that we tell ourselves because we are constantly starting. If we go to another professional position, we're starting over. If you move from one residence to another residence, we're starting over. And in all those events, there could be some emotional attachment there. So let's not fool ourselves into thinking that we are unable to start over because we are constantly starting over. The big one out of that list, fear of abandonment, there are so many people who, because of their early childhood experiences and even adult experiences, fear abandonment. It may have been a scenario where there was someone that they really cared about and they really put all their effort into. And it came a time when that person, they expected that person to be there, and that person was not there, and it left them cold to deal with that situation alone. And it scarred them for a tremendous amount. That's a heavy, heavy burden to carry around. And it has a tremendous impact on more relationships than you would ever. I will share this with you. It's not the end because we can work through that. You're able to work through that once you understand why you're feeling a certain way and why you're responding. Knowing where their origins is allows you the ability to work. So, you know, that's why asking yourself these questions is way deeper than communication when you're talking about navigating bound. It's an emotional self leadership. as we started out before in the beginning of this series. You're professional, you're mature, you're running teams, you're building solutions, and at the same time, unable to have a fulfilling relationship that makes you happy. There are a lot of pieces that go along, and I hope what we're going through with the framework positions you to have the best relationship just by doing some work. So understand boundaries aren't about control. You know, a boundary is not a controlling element for you to hold against somebody. It's about controlling access to you, to your energy, to your time, to your emotional investments. Because healthy boundaries say, I cannot force your behavior, but I can decide what behavior gets access to. Now, that's the power that you want. It's not aggression. It is absolutely not manipulation. And it's obviously not emotional punishment. It's about self respect. And that's where we start doing the real work when it comes to us. Okay. So, what are our actions and our takeaways from this session of navigating your boundaries? Number one, let's identify some leaks in our navigation. So, the first thing is to write down just one place where your words and your enforcement don't match. For instance, if you have someone who's using a certain word that you don't like towards you to describe you, and you say, I'm no longer going to um, accept that, write it down if you didn't enforce that. That I can share with you that I personally dealt with. There was a comment that was constantly being made about my behavior or about the relationship. You find yourself, you get to a point, you say, if you continue to reference this relationship in those terms, I'm not going to tolerate it anymore because I don't choose to live my life that way. And you stick to it. So identify that one boundary that you set, but you did not enforce, right? Because, you know, if the enforcement isn't matching your boundary, then you're still giving access to that person. Do you think that violates your peace of mind, peace in your life? It makes a big difference because you've just found a significant leak in your boundary settings. The other action that you can take following this, and you can take this today, create a consequence. One consequence for repeated behavior, one that may result in less emotional access. It may involve reducing the communication where you're not immediately available. You basically take your time and you put that person on pause. Or it may be a scenario in which you just need to completely separate from the relationship because it is causing too much emotional damage to you. And it's impacting not only your way of life, but your professional life as well. I mean, boundaries need to have behavioral structure as well. It's not just good just to have them, but there's a, a consequences that need to accompany those actions. So explaining yourself repeatedly, it's important. Emotionally healthy people do not require constant explanations for basic respect. That's just something that at your level of operating today is just totally unacceptable. Stop over explaining standards that you've already communicated. And I've said that before. At some point it's not about misunderstanding what what you've shared with them. At that point, you've identified a key misalignment in your relationship. Let me leave you with this. Your peace would never survive in any environment where your boundaries are constantly being negotiated. It just will not work for you. The flow will be interrupted constantly. And the moment you stop abandoning yourself just to keep other people comfortable, that's when everything will change for you. Putting yourself first. It's not about saying the other person is second. However, you have to look out for your emotional well being first. Just like they say in an airplane, in the case of emergency, if you have a child with you, put your oxygen on your face first before you help the other person with you. So, in the same with your standards, ensure that your emotional standards are being met before you're trying to basically meet someone else's. Because boundaries aren't about rejection. Boundaries are just self-respect in action. That's it. And your standards, your boundaries, and your decisions finally align. You'll stop surviving in relationships, and they will be relationships in which you'll start choosing from a position of power. And there's nothing better than being in a relationship where both individuals are. And thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Rod Johnson, and this is No More Small Talk, because emotional presence is the standard. And if what you like today, please share, comment, and like. And for even more additional information related to resetting your emotional standards and starting down the framework, visit my site, nomoresmalltalk.org/home, to see additional information that can help you restart and get on the track where you are on the path to happiness. Have a good evening and see you in the next episode.